وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر وعبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
Good morning, everybody. We have here today attorney Debra Ribitwer. A number of people, whether they are in the Middle Eastern community or outside of the Middle Eastern community, such as custody, such as alimony, such as whether or not you can take your children outside of the state, outside of the United States, and so forth and so on. And so we wanted to address them this time. Debra Ribitwer has more than 37 years of experience in domestic relations, in divorce, in custody, in matrimonial law. She attended Wayne State University and got her doctorate in law with honors from Detroit College of Law in 1977. What I remember, and it's stuck in my mind, I think you told me that 38 years ago, something like that, you were in a class of about 104 or 107? 110 students, and there were how many women with you? 6 women. So you were 6 out of 110 in a class of 110. So 104 men, 6 women, and you graduated at the very top of that class. Way to go, Debbie. That's the way to do it.
Thank you.
She has been specializing in divorce law, matrimonial law, custody, pre-nup agreements, post-nup agreements. Her office is in Bloomfield Hills, correct?
That is correct.
And can we give your number, if you don't mind, the office number?
That would be great, thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
What is your phone number, if you don't mind?
248-647-7900.
All right. Pleasure to see you, Debbie. I know how very busy you are. We really appreciate it to make the time to be here for the full hour. We want to talk about issues that have to do with custody. How do you determine custody? How do you determine alimony? Is it true that mom or the woman always and automatically gets custody of her children? How many Michigan fathers are stay-at-home parents? Child support. How is child support determined? How long can a parent receive child support? What happens if a parent who is ordered to pay child support does not pay child support? What is the recourse then? We want to talk about travel. That's something that touches the Middle Eastern community a lot. People who are divorced and one of the parents chooses to take the child or the children outside of the state, whether it be within 100 miles or whether it is more than 100 miles. What is the effect? Why don't you briefly tell us as well what the Hague Convention is and what is the effect of the Hague Convention on travel and taking your children post-divorce? Can you move once you get divorced? Do you need somebody's permission? What I mean is the court's permission, excuse me, and so forth and so on. So we have a lot to cover today. So, Debbie, how about we start with this common misconception that a mom automatically gets custody of the children in a divorce. Is that true?
That is not correct.
Okay.
Michigan has a custody law which is known by attorneys as the best interest of the child law.
Okay.
So there are many factors under it that a court has to consider in determining, and they literally weigh the scales of justice as to what's in the best interest of the child. not what's in the best interest of mom or dad, but what's in the best interest of the child.
Right. I remember having studied those 11 factors, and there is no hard and fast rule. It's not like you have to have 11 out of the 11 or 8 out of the 11. It's just like a majority of them and how the judges feels about when she or he goes to answer those questions, whether it tilts more toward the kids being with mom or the kids being with dad. But when we say custody, we don't mean 100% of the time.
No, and custody and parenting time are different.
Yes.
You can have joint custody on equal parenting time. You can have sole custody, but still split the days evenly. The parenting time, and in my opinion, there is really no reason to have a custody order. What's important is how much time each parent gets to spend with their child.
Now, from your experience in representing a lot of men and a lot of women, what do you find the majority? Tell me some of the things that, all things being equal, tilt more toward the mom getting custody rather than the dad.
Particularly
Give me like the classics, let's say.
The classic would be the stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
If the mom is not working and the dad is.
Yes.
And she really has no viable skills from which to go out into the workplace and get a job, why would anybody want their children in a daycare center with a working parent if you have a non-working parent who can stay at home and be with the kids?
So again, applying the best interest of the child, it is in the best interest of that child to remain with the non-working mom rather than go to a daycare and live with the working dad. It certainly makes perfect sense.
Makes sense. And if you're going to pay a daycare, you know what? Give your ex-wife the money to care for the kids during that time. People need to be more logical as opposed to so emotional over the issues of parenting time and custody, and hopefully their attorney will help them do that, because it is an emotional upheaval in their lives, and you need somebody who can sort of calm everybody down and look at really what is in the best interest of your child. This is not a fight, it's a sharing.
Yes, I understand that. Can you briefly tell the listeners, how is custody, now we're talking about payments to ordered by the court against one parent, typically it's the dad, but not always, to pay child support, not custody. How is that generally determined, Debbie? And is it set in stone, or do changing circumstances allow somebody to change, the child support payments? And would you please address the fact that it is not retroactive?
Child support is determined now in Michigan by an actual formula. So we plug in how many overnights each parent has, what the income of the mother is, what the income of the father is.
So if the income of the mother is zero, then you put zero.
Then you
if
put
the mom
zero.
is not working. Okay.
That's correct. And then you determine if one party is paying out of pocket child care, you plug that into the formula. If it's a non-working mother, you're not going to have any child care, and health insurance. And you press a button, and it tells you what that number is going to be.
So really, it takes the guessing out of it. It takes the bias out of it. It takes the subjectivity out of it. It's just a question of math. You plug in the correct information, and it will spit out to you which parent and how much.
And the court can deviate from that formula only if you meet certain deviation factors. So sometimes we have a parent who is, even though they don't have the same equal overnights, is spending a considerable time taking care of the kids during the day. Maybe it's a mom that's a teacher, and the dad who doesn't get off work until 7:30 at night. So she's picking up the kids from school every day. She's getting the children dinner. we can deviate a little bit from those guidelines, but you have to tell the court what it would have been under the guidelines, why you want to deviate, and get the court's
permission. And then the judge,
permission.
in her or his discretion, will decide to deviate or not.
That is correct.
In a divorce action, is the judge the trier of fact, or do you have a jury?
We are not allowed to have a jury. It is the judge who is the trier of fact.
So then the judge is extremely important in a divorce action, because that judge not only applies the law, but that judge and every judge in a divorce action decides who's telling the truth, who is credible, who is lying, who is exaggerating, who is trying to cheat the system, and so forth and so on. Am I right?
You are correct.
So the judge becomes extremely important. I can tell you that in car accidents, medical malpractice, whatever it is, we have the right, and we always do, to ask for a trial by jury. This way, the power isn't all concentrated in the hands of the judge. If the judge doesn't like our client, or the judge doesn't like us as lawyers or whatever, I mean, you don't know how that may affect her or his ability to determine the facts. So we take that away, and we give it to 7, jurors who are more likely to be, perhaps just or unbiased than one judge. But in a divorce action, who the judge is very important. And so when you file a lawsuit in a court of law and you know who the judge is, you kind of pretty much can tell, because judges, like us, like human beings, they tend to be consistent, right? And so, and we have to take a very short break, by the way, and we can answer that question. Know your judge, I think, in a divorce action is very important.
Very important.
All right. And with your permission, we will expound on that after the break. We have with us today the highly respected attorney Debra Ribitwer, specializing in domestic relations, alimony, custody, prenup, postnup, and we will be back in a few minutes. We have with us for the remainder of the hour attorney Debra Ribitwer. We were talking prior to this break about the importance, especially in divorces, the importance of the judge, because the judge is it. The judge not only tells you what the law is and puts her or his hammer down, but the judge, and I have seen this, decides, and these judges typically take sides. I could see it as an observer in a courtroom many times. As soon as the parties to a divorce action will appear before the judge, you have the woman's lawyer and you have the man's lawyer. I could always tell who the judge was favoring from the very beginning. Tell me a little bit your feelings about that.
Well, it's good and it's bad. Michigan, some years ago, created a family law court so that you have judges who are really dedicated to wanting to be in that area of law.
Right.
And you assign one judge to in that divorce case, and if those people get divorced and there is a subsequent divorce, that judge gets the subsequent divorce also. So all of the children have the same judge all the way through.
So if any of the parents divorces again, that case must return to the first. Ooh,
that is
don't
true.
like that at all.
And
unless with some luck that judge moved from the family division to the civil division, and that happens.
Yes, but that's actually good for us, because there are times in divorce cases, as everybody has known and heard from their friends and family, that becomes very contentious, where one side really is acting up. So you have the judge hearing the behavior, watching what's happening, watching people, how they act in a courtroom. And so sometimes them having an opinion is not all that bad. You want them to get a flavor for what's going on and who's being cooperative or uncooperative, who's trying to alienate children. So you want a history in family law. You want them to know what the past history is. So it works in our favor. Certainly you need to counsel your client how to appear in court, how to act in court, as you do how to act in their real lives. That the divorce is the parent's problem. You shouldn't make it your children's problem.
I love that, and we can talk about that forever and ever, and we really should. However, I just want to make sure before we get to the psychological aspect of divorces and how adults behave in a divorce and how adults maybe should behave in a divorce, I want to make sure I cover a few legalities. With your permission, I'd like to move on to, can a parent with custody move out of state or out of the city after a divorce is granted, or should this parent, by the way, I do apologize, one thing we did not cover, and I want to touch upon briefly if we may, when the court presses that button after the court plugs in certain information about how many overnights and what mom's income is and dad's income is and so forth and so on, if there is a change in circumstances, say dad's income has gone down now, dad has lost his job, mom has lost a job, or whatever it is. So now the child support payments can be different. What everybody needs to know is, and we say it all the time, is the court speaks through its orders. So, until a new order is entered by the court, the old child support payments remain in effect. So you can't say, well, I lost my job, I have to pay $600 a month. I don't have to pay it anymore because that was based on when I had a job. No, your lawyer or yourself need to go back to court, file a motion, go before the judge, explain to the judge the change in circumstances, convince the judge, and have the judge issue a new order, whether it's the judge or whether it is the court.
Friend of the court.
Right. What I mean is the court court itself, issue a new order, and the new payments, the adjusted payments, are now become in effect. So that's something a lot of people don't think they understand. I guess what we're saying to people out there is, when you have a change in circumstance that you believe may result in a reduction in child support, don't sit and think about it. Run to your lawyer so that you can do what you need to do so that a new order is issued ASAP. Because until a new order is issued, the old order remains in effect, and if you don't follow it, now you're in violation.
And that's very important for your listeners to understand. The court doesn't have the authority to make the reduction in child support or increase in child support retroactive beyond the date that you filed. So if you lose your job on July 1st, you need to go to the friend of the court, file a motion, because if you don't file the motion until August 1st, from July 1st to August 1st, you're absolutely right. Tough luck. It cannot be made retroactive beyond the point that you actually inform the court.
The new order is issued. The new order replaces the old order, and until then, everything pursuant to the old order applies.
That is correct.
So you do not want to be in violation, because that leads us to the next question. What happens when you are in violation? Listen, everybody, please, because I hear this happening a lot. What happens when a parent violates a child support order?
Well, one of two things will happen.
Yes.
Sometimes the friend of the court, which is supposed to review all of the child support orders for delinquencies and bring the parent who is disobeying the order before the court on your behalf, that takes about 3 months after they default. And most parents who have custody cannot wait 3 months, cannot go 3 months without child support.
So even without the other parent doing anything about it, sua sponte, on its own, the court system at some point will catch up to the fact there are delinquent child support payments. how would the friend of the court know? Do the payments go to the friend of the court in the first place?
If the payments are going through the friend of the court, and they are required to be going through the friend of the court unless the parties
are they required?
opt out. Yeah, they are required.
Unless
one party or both parties sign an order opting out of the friend of the court, in which case it makes it much more difficult to collect. So I don't ever advise my clients
to opt out. So you advise your clients to have the child support payments go through the friend of the court because it's much easier to track.
It's much easier to track. It's a government system that the federal government has access to, so the federal government can take tax refunds that are coming to the non-paying spouse.
You can garnish. So a parent who is delinquent in child support payments can have her or his taxes garnished, tax refund garnished.
They can be
held. What
in
about wages? Can their wages be garnished?
They are garnished in the original judgment of divorce. There is an income withholding order in the original granting of the judgment of divorce that goes against their payment. So it is an automatic garnishment. If you're going through the friend of the court, you can do a private one also. So it's supposed to come straight out of their wages. People who violate it and do not pay can be held in contempt of court, and the judge can put them in jail until they obey the order.
And how often does that happen?
When there are repeated acts of non-payment, and the party who is supposed to be paying has the ability to pay, the judge will put them in jail.
And you have seen that happen?
I have, and I've almost never seen anybody held in contempt of court for non-payment not have a friend or family member bring down that check within 24 hours of being locked up. Suddenly, the money materializes. It's an effective.
So the condition to being released out of jail is to pay your back child support.
Yeah, we call it like the Monopoly game. Get out of jail card is you pay your back support.
And let me ask you, Attorney Debra Ribitwer, who is our guest today for the full hour. We're talking about, as you just heard us, divorces and child support and custody, and we'll be talking about travel outside the United States, the Hague Convention, and other issues as well. What does one need to do? Should the grieving parent, let's say, motion the court, file a motion?
It's a quicker process if you file a motion. You don't have to wait the 3 months. If they miss a month, or two, or whatever you choose to wait, you can file a motion by through your own attorney and show that there is non-payment. You do a sworn affidavit, and that will bring the offending party before the court, and you argue your case. And the contempt ability to hold a parent in contempt and go to jail is normally what makes people pay. But there are all kinds of different options the court has. You can issue liens against property. You can sell property. You can impede somebody from renewing a license. You can impede somebody from renewing a passport.
Okay, let's talk about that. How can the aggrieved parent, meaning by that the parent who is old child support, prevent the assaulting parent or the aggressor or whatever you want to call it from renewing a passport or a driver's license?
The court has those powers under the statute. So through the court, the court will advise the immigration.
So then the parent who is old child support will have to bring that to the attention of the judge. Your Honor, I think that my ex-spouse's driver's license or passport is due to be renewed, and
you don't even have to do that. If the court just reports it to the United States Immigration Bureau, they'll flag the passport.
Okay, so then let's talk about that. When does a court report a violation for non-payment of child support to the Immigration Bureau?
Normally when you're asked to do so. But if you
you mean that you would ask the judge on behalf of your client to report the violation to
immigration, and when they get to a certain level of non-payment, the courts automatically, the friend of the court will report. As I said, the computer systems now are all synced so that the government can see, the federal government can see when there's non-payment.
I'm told that we need to take a break, but very quickly before we do that, how often have you seen, because that's an issue with our Middle Eastern community, how often have you seen immigration being notified of a non-paying ex-spouse?
I have seen it once. I had a friend call me who was going on a cruise and needed to renew his passport. And when he got down to I think at the post office, right, they said to him, we can't renew this. You've been flagged. You owe $70,000 in child support. And so they came to my office and they said, what should I do? And I said, pay it.
Can you pay the $70,000?
It had turned out that he had been making direct payments to his wife. So his wife signed an order for the court that in fact she had received direct payments and he wasn't paying through the friend of the court. The court issued the order and asked that the passport hold be released.
And we're going to take a quick break, and right after we return and before we move to the subject of travel, another important subject for our Middle Eastern audience, is it the Attorney General involved when there is a non-payment? I remember like a magical number of $10,000 or more. With your permission, Attorney Debra Ribitwer, with more than 37 years of experience in domestic law, divorce, custody, child support, prenup, postnup. We will return shortly after the break. Attorney Debra Ribitwer. Today, she is our guest for the full hour. I know we have been talking a lot, but we have been hopefully trying to share important information. Attorney Debra Ribitwer, if you are owed more than, or if you owe more than $10,000 in child support payments, the Attorney General gets involved, and what is that about, and what are the consequences of that?
The Attorney General is supposed to become involved, and is supposed to basically arrest all of the offending parents. So whoever was supposed to be paying child support and is that far in arrearage will in fact, or supposed to be, arrested by the Attorney General, and then they will bring them before the court, in front of the divorce court, yes, the judge, to be arraigned. And they will generally...
So it's a felony.
It's a felony.
Now, is this law, to your knowledge, being enforced?
You will see frequent roundups with most of our attorney generals. Michigan has been leading in the collecting of support.
That has been my understanding.
Very effective tool.
So then if you are behind by more than $10,000... I mean, not only can you be held in contempt of court, not only can you be jailed, but you can be arrested by the Michigan attorney. So what will they do? Come to your house with a warrant for your arrest?
They will.
And who normally tips you said that all the computers are now synced. Who normally tips the Attorney General's office?
He has access to the same computer system that the courts do.
To your knowledge, the arrests that you have been made aware of, have they been the result of maybe an ex-spouse complaining by calling the Attorney General's office, or the Attorney General on its own?
I believe it is the Attorney General on its own that creates lists. It's scary, but so is living without support. So are the people who depend upon child support to feed their children, to house their children. When somebody is that far delinquent, imagine the impact it has on the custodial parent as well as the children.
Attorney Debra Ribitwer, what about how easy is it to hide assets when you are contemplating or you are in the middle of a divorce? And what are the consequences of that? I think this is a $64 million question.
Yes, well, there are many cases where one or the other party is trying to hide assets, and you need to have an attorney who is seasoned in being able to look at tax returns and picking up things, or the thing that really catches everybody is to do a cost of living analysis. If you're spending $200,000 a year, but telling the court
that you're making 40.
you make 40, it's easy for an attorney to put together a cost analysis.
I know we have something in the law called a fraudulent conveyance, where if you know you're being sued or in the middle of a litigation, in order for you to be not to have to pay for whatever judgment you may be facing, you transfer what you have and you put it in your sister's name and brother's name and mom's name and whatever it is. And we normally look within the past 1 or 2 years to see whether any conveyance has been made from the person facing litigation to somebody else, and this may be considered in the eyes of the law as a fraudulent conveyance. Is there such a thing also in divorce law?
Absolutely. You know, the foundation of a contract or a conveyance is consideration. So if I have a house and I am conveying it to somebody else, that somebody else is going to pay me for it, right?
Right.
So if you file
unless you become generous all of a sudden.
Yeah,
right?
Yes, there's been a lot of generosity in my cases, giving away
there has
assets.
been a lot of generosity in the Middle Eastern community, very sadly, on the part of men who are divorcing their wives.
But if you present that evidence to the court and you can show that there was no consideration for the transfer,
right.
The court, and what I asked
and
the court to do,
just so that we can put it in lay term, would mean something like, okay, you had a house and all of a sudden you give it to your brother. It just doesn't make sense unless your brother is paying you for it. So whether your brother paid you for it or not, the judge is going to look at it as if your brother paid you whatever the fair market value and will split that baby probably in half credited to the wife and half to the husband. If I may interrupt, I remember one time I was in court and this husband came and he was trying to explain, a Middle Eastern man, and was trying to explain what he did with the $70,000 in cash. And he told the judge that he blew it in the casino. The judge did not buy it. And the judge said, well, I'm sorry, whether you blew it in the casino or not, fact is, your wife is entitled to half. So you have to come up with $35,000, and you can blow your other $35,000. In other words, just because you say you did something doesn't mean that the judge, remember what we said? The judge is not just the one who says what the law is, but is the trier of fact, meaning the judge decides who's lying and who's telling the truth, who's believable and who's not, who's telling a story that makes sense and is logical and who is not. And if the judge listens to this man like that judge did and doesn't buy it that he blew it on the casino, then she's going to make him account for half of it to the wife, and that's exactly what happened. She did not believe the man.
And that is a frequent story of what happens in our cases. It is not the unusual story, unfortunately, and that's why the attorneys need to be effective in gathering the information. You couldn't go to the Register of Deeds office in any county, give them a person's name, and it will show all property that they have any interest in, or likewise any that they don't anymore, and you can go through the deeds on that property and determine whether or not there have been fraudulent transfers.
And how often do you use private investigators for offshore accounts and whatever the case may be, overseas?
Frequently. If a client comes in and says to me that they're frequent travelers or they have relatives overseas, we will hire a private investigator.
And needless to say, all the things we're talking about today, we can be talking about for hours and hours. For example, hiding assets. That's a topic that we can talk about, for a long time, but certainly the time remaining does not permit us. What about Attorney Debra Ribitwer? What about when you are divorced and now you want to take your children out of Michigan, either to relocate or whether you want to travel. Can you do that, or do you need the court's permission?
We have a very strong domicile order, which says that from the time somebody files for divorce, they cannot move the children more than 100 miles away from their original home that they were living in when the divorce was filed, unless you're moving closer to somebody. So you can, if the move results in you being closer to the other parent, you can do it. Otherwise, there's a 100-mile rule. You can't move more than 100 miles unless the other parent... We're talking
about moving. We're not talking about taking the kids for the weekend or whatever. It's moving, meaning with the intent to relocate.
To relocate, correct. Right. Without the permission of either the other parent in writing, and you do a court order that consents to the move.
Yeah, a consent order.
Or if the other party won't consent, you have to get the court's permission.
Then again, as is the case with any two parties who are feuding, when there is no private agreement between the two, which then can turn into a consent order, you file a motion in front of the judge, meaning you go in front of the judge to tell the judge about something that is bothering you, and the judge will rule one way or the other. What about the Hague Convention? Can you tell our listeners, with countries like Lebanon, and we have to take a short break, and then we will address the Hague Convention, and what the effect of the Hague Convention is on travel, particularly as it relates to countries like Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, Egypt.
I would be more than happy to.
Allow us to take a quick break and we will return. Hello, we are back on the air. I want to make sure this time that we properly thank everybody before the last few seconds remaining. We have about 9 minutes remaining. I want to thank Layla, first and foremost, my beautiful sister Layla Al-Husseini, top of her class 37 years ago among 110 students, 104 of whom were men. Way to go. Graduated with honors. Gorgeous attorney Debra Ribitwer. If the listeners only saw the elegance that is sitting across from me. And Debra, every time I see you, dressed to the nines from head to toe. Scarves and sublime elegance. And the brains to go with it. I cannot get over. You were one of 6 girls in a class of 110. And you graduated with honors at the top of that class. That is so impressive.
Well, thank you so much.
Do you know what happened to the remaining 5 women? Like, is one a Michigan Supreme Court justice and another?
One is an Oakland County. One is an Oakland County Circuit judge.
Okay.
One of my friends is a district court judge.
Okay.
One of them is no longer practicing law. One moved to Chicago.
Okay.
And one dropped out.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah,
that's okay. All right. So let's talk about the Hague Convention.
Okay. The Hague Convention is all countries in the world are invited to participate in certain rules that countries who belong to the Hague Convention all agree to obey. But there is a particular portion of the Hague Convention that is of interest when we're dealing with abductions of children. So there's an international child abduction part of the Hague Convention. And the countries sometimes participate in parts of the Hague Convention, but don't agree to other parts. And this becomes very important with travel, in particular in Michigan. When you get divorced in the state of Michigan, there is a paragraph that goes in your judgment of divorce.
We were so off. 1993. And it was adopted or entered into force for the United States in 2008. Wow.
2008 or 1998?
No, the Hague Convention was concluded in 1993.
Okay.
And that's the one, by the way, just so that people know what the Hague Convention is, that's the convention that establishes international standards of practices between countries. Because you don't live alone, you see. I mean, what we do here can affect, what happens in Mexico, in Canada. somebody may be caught in a crime here who is of Mexican descent, so forth. So the Hague Convention touches upon, the protocol that the countries have to adopt with each other when there are issues that touch more than one country.
And so as it relates to children, if you travel to a country, if you have a custody order in the United States of America, and you travel to a country who is not a member of the International Child Abduction portion of the Hague Convention, and the parent decides not to come back to the United States,
now it's considered an abduction. Well, first off, to travel, not to move, to travel, you have two divorcing parents, and one of them wants, say, to travel to Lebanon for 3 weeks. Should that parent seek somebody's permission?
I am telling you from past experience that if you are traveling as a parent with minor children, even if you're still married, if you are going on international travel and your spouse is not with you, I suggest that you have a signed and sealed affidavit.
Affidavit. That's not a court document. It's an affidavit, meaning anything that can be written and notarized.
And the other parent should sign it, so that when you get to the airport, when you get to the airport, they say, do you have your husband's permission or your wife's permission?
Well, how often does that happen?
It happens more frequently than you believe.
Some people. So now let's assume that we have, and I'm sorry for the sake of, in the interest of time, I cut you off. Let's assume that somebody takes the children and has permission to take them, say, to Lebanon, and overstays her welcome there and decides to stay there. Now, that's considered abduction or kidnapping or whatever you want to call it. Now, the Hague Convention, which applies in relationships between two countries, the United States and Lebanon, what happens now?
So what a participating Hague Convention member would do is if you abducted a child, they will recognize the United States order and they will send the child back. So the parent can go pick them up. So let's talk about,
is Lebanon a member of the Hague Convention?
They are not.
Is Egypt a member of the Hague Convention?
They are not.
Is Palestine a member of the Hague Convention?
They are not. So
is Israel?
Israel is. So what now, in a divorce case now, in order to travel, you need something more than just the other party's affidavit. You need a court order to allow you to travel to a country with minor children
that not participating in the Hague Convention?
Not participating.
Is that a new law?
It is a new law. It was
so then people who are traveling to Lebanon, Palestine, Egypt, because these countries do not participate in the Hague Convention, there is a new law here in Michigan that requires an order.
A court order.
Court order. We're talking about divorcing parents.
Divorced parents. So in your
court order to say what?
It must say the parents have agreed, or the court has ruled that the parent can travel to the country, the non-participating country.
But the truth is, if they stay there, the United States cannot do anything. So what does this court order? It's just a law, though. You have to follow it, otherwise you're in violation.
You're in violation.
And you have the other parent have something on you.
That is correct.
Okay. We have come to an end. I think that we have managed to bring in a lot of very useful, hopefully, information. Attorney Debra Ribitwer, this has been a wonderful, fabulous 1 hour. You have shared with us a lot of information. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. God bless you. We hope to have you again, and thank you to our listeners. Debra, thank you. Can you give that one-liner again? A divorce is about parents, not about the children.
Yes. A divorce is about parents, not the children. It's the parents' divorce, not the children's.